So fire away. All right. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the press conference today that's being hosted by In Defense of Christians, the Armenian National Committee of America, and the Hellenic American Leadership Council. I'm Stephen Howard. I'm the National Outreach Director with In Defense of Christians. And today's topic is extremely important. The focus of this press conference is the genocide, the continuation of the genocide that Turkey's committed against Christians a century ago, and not only their denial of it, but their continued persecution and onslaught of ancient Christian communities in the Middle East and in the Eastern Mediterranean and in the Caucasus today. And we're also looking to really push the administration to take a stronger Turkey stance. We have a remarkable group of panelists and experts with us today. We have the president of IDC, Toufic Baaklini. We have a special representative, Robert Avetisyan, from on the ground in our side right now. We have Michael Rubin with the American Enterprise Institute here. We have Endy Zemenides of the Hellenic American Leadership Council here. We have Richard Ghazal, who's a special advisor for In Defense of Christians and an expert on Syrian issues. And we're honored, of course, to have Aram Hamparian here with us from the Armenian National Committee of America. The way the conversation is going to flow this morning is we'll have IDC's president deliver some special remarks, and then we will basically do a kind of a roundtable panel with our experts, and then we will open it up to press and to everyone watching on Facebook Live for questions. So to kick things off, I'll invite IDC's president, Toufic Baaklini, to offer some opening remarks.
Thank you all for joining us. Thank you to our great panelists and experts, and to our brothers and sisters in Armenia. So we've always worked together with our Armenian brothers and sisters, and we've always had our target is always the Turkey and Erdogan, and there is a reason. He helps terrorism in the Middle East. He's trying to spread his terrorist activities all over, including lately what we see in Karabakh and the region. He's done the same in northeast Syria, and he's trying also to start a militia in Lebanon. So he's one of the, as the French president said also, he's moving ISIS fighters from Iraq and Syria and flying him out to fight our Armenian brothers. So it's, as we know, Turkey continues to advocate for the denial of the Armenian genocide, the Armenian Christian genocide. In fact, over 3 million people that were killed over 100 years ago. He's denying that ever happened. Of course, as I said, Turkey has been supporting jihadists all over the region and persecuting Christians. We've heard, in fact, a couple of days ago, they've been bombing some areas in northeast Syria, Christian towns, and we saw an expert on this, Amy Holmes, that reported for the Council on Foreign Relations, shows that Erdogan has violated his ceasefire agreement with the US over 800 times. This guy doesn't listen. He doesn't like, statements. We had a great position and statement yesterday from Secretary Pompeo. But I don't think this guy would listen. So we appreciate what Pompeo had to say yesterday, but without real sanctions and we saw, we tested, and we saw, starting with Pastor Brunson, the release of Pastor Brunson wouldn't have happened if we didn't have US sanctions. So the same happened in Northeast Syria last year, sanctions worked. So we have to continue to pressure, not in words, but in action. We expect the Trump administration to take some action to stop this holy war for him. So, and the Erdogan used the Christians of Turkey as conquered people. Turkey, as I said, is not only a threat to the Christians in the Middle East, it's a danger actor as well. US policy towards Turkey is not working. And as I said, President Trump and Congress need to heavily sanction Turkey and reassess the entire relationship in light of this hostility. Civilians in Artsakh, a land where Christianity was born, and a friend of mine I was talking with yesterday, a congressman, he said Christianity did not start in Washington or Paris or, this is where Christianity began. And we have to, we want our people to know this is where Christianity began, and this is where Christianity is going to stay with our help and support. As we know, Turkey has bombed the cathedral in Shushi, Holy Savior Cathedral, was bombed by the Azerbaijanis last week. So they're targeting, of course, Christian cathedrals and churches. As I always say, if we are the voice of the voiceless, if we fail not to act right now, we will be as implicated by our silence. So it is our job and our belief to speak out, because we will be as implicated if we did not. We are the voice of our brothers and sisters, and we will continue to do so. I want to thank all of you, and we'll wait to hear from our great lineup of experts. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Toufic. I now would like to turn to Robert Avetisyan. He's the permanent representative of the Nagorno-Karabakh Republic to the United States. We know he's on the ground now in Artsakh, and so Special Representative, we would love to hear an update and any thoughts and reflections on the situation from you.
Thank you so much. First, I want to thank Mr. Baaklini, Mr. Howard, Mr. Hamparian, the IDC, the ANCA, and everyone, and distinguished panelists, of course, for joining us for this important discussion. Well, as you already know, on September 27, early in the AM on Sunday morning, hundreds of, or if not thousands of missiles began to pour on sleeping houses, and indiscriminate fire covered pretty much the entire Republic of Artsakh. This situation was going back and forth with changing level of success for either of the sides. But one thing we can say for now is that after 16 or how many, so it's already more than that, 17 days of fighting, the blitzkrieg has apparently failed. Azerbaijan's declared goals of conquering or occupying Artsakh within 4 hours are not possible. It's not doable. This conflict is now pretty much unprecedented from the previous aggressions from Azeris. It is unprecedented first and foremost in the scope and scale and the quality of weaponry which has been used against us. And when I say against us, I mean not only the defense army, but also the peaceful civilians and the entire civilian infrastructure of the entire territory of Artsakh, and pretty often Armenia too. It is unprecedented in scope and range of the weaponry. all sorts of 21st century state-of-the-art missiles, drones, air force, ground force, armored vehicles. The entire armada of the weaponry that has been collected and stockpiled by Azerbaijan for 2 decades with easy oil money is being used against us. It is also unprecedented in the number of participants, as Mr. Baaklini already mentioned. Turkey, if previously it has been a kind of hands-on player in Turkey in Azerbaijan's domestic or foreign policy, now they previously were behind the scene. Now they're completely hands-on. They even implement the command and control of the armed forces. The air force is completely now regulated by Turkish specialists. Their instructors are in the field. Their special forces are penetrating into sleeping cities and terror local population. So Turkey's participation further aggravates and complicates the entire story. And of course, the Turkish hiring and transportation of thousands of mercenaries from Syria and Lebanon. This is also something not new for Artsakh, but very new for the region for the past 30 years. And this is what kind of changed the entire paradigm of this conflict. This is not anymore the conflict or war between Artsakh and Azerbaijan. This is a conflict between Artsakh and international terrorism, or what we call the triple unity, criminal unity of Turkey, Azerbaijan, and international terrorists. The blitzkrieg has failed. The shelling continues, including of the peaceful populations and all settlements. We in Stepanakert 2 days ago, we've seen in one day pretty much 80 to 100 long-range missiles hitting every section of the city indiscriminately. And we also have civilian deaths, unfortunately, and many wounded. And on the battlefield, our guys are doing whatever they can to protect our land and our freedom and our choice to live on the government of our choosing. Turkey has been trying to manipulate with a religious factor. This is not the first time Azerbaijan is resorting to that strategy. They have been playing this card of jihad against the infidels, knowing that Artsakh is a cradle of Christianity. They have been trying to unite the radical Islamism against us. But I think even some real jihadists from that troubled Middle East, they also began to say that, no, these are mercenaries. This has nothing to do with the jihad. But there is a mess going on. Turkey keeps bringing and pouring in hundreds and hundreds of mercenaries from those countries. We always say that the religion is not the major factor in this conflict. It is always a factor in any conflict situation, especially between the nations which belong to different religions. But in our case, it was rather our choice for freedom versus Azerbaijan, despite Azerbaijan's attempt to prevent that freedom from happening for Armenians, or to suppress that freedom. Of course, we think that all the factors, including the religious component, should be used to bring down the situation back to normal, to help cease the fire and return to the negotiation table, because that's the only solution here, especially after so many days of fierce, really fierce, large-scale fighting and no any significant advantage for Azerbaijanis, and their failure to achieve their military, political, or whatever it is goals also indicate that. We continue the fight. We have kind of accommodated. This is the third time we are undergoing the same type of aggression, also with a different scale. So the attempt to paralyze life in Artsakh also failed. Our population, whoever wanted to go for whatever reasons, because personal security is always a factor, they were free to do so. But many of us are still here in Stepanakert, elsewhere around Artsakh, and we try to keep the state running and keep to make sure that we're helpful to the soldiers on the battlefield as much as we can. There was a significant attempt mediated by the co-chairs, but mostly by Russia in Moscow, to bring to the cessation of hostilities, but it lasted for 3 minutes. At 12 noon on October 10, it was supposed to take place. 12:03 p.m., Azerbaijan resumes missile strikes, and a large chunk of special forces, actually, something tells us that there were Turkish troops entered Aghdam and terrorized local population until they eventually were neutralized. So the lack of trust is one of the bad things in all the situation. Azerbaijan fails to respect its own commitments. 3 minutes is the maximum they can do. Of course, we also realize that after so many negative commitments by the regime in Azerbaijan, which lacks legitimacy whatsoever and has been kicked by international watchdogs for the consistently poor human rights record, they want to deliver something. They want to make sure that they create that potential for the despotic power to remain for a few more years. And also we have to consider Turkey, which is also pushing Azerbaijan and instigating to continue attacks until they reach the successful outcome for them. That is also why we expect from the international community and all the organizations, and of course we're very glad to see that the IDC is also has taken such a firm stance towards this. We need the world to speak out. We need the world to involve in this situation. And if we talk about the United States in particular, there are several reasons for that, of course, why we expect from the US to be more active in this. First and foremost, because it is one of the co-chairs of the OSCE Minsk group. And as such, the United States is it is actively involved in this process for already many years, almost 30 years. And with when there was no Turkey involved, when there were no mercenaries involved, I think Azerbaijani leaders were they had more place to maneuver in the diplomatic field. But now, I think they're squeezed in the Turkish hands. The second reason is that the United States has proclaimed itself to be among the champions of fight against the international terrorism. And as I said, this is not Azerbaijan Artsakh anymore. This is Artsakh versus the triple unity and Azerbaijan and Turkey and the international terrorism. So we expect the US as well as the rest of the civilized world to help us to defeat the international terrorism. Otherwise, it's going to knock all the doors in the neighborhood. And, that terrorism doesn't tolerate any boundaries. And they will knock all the doors and all.
Stephen, I think he's having some connectivity issues. If you want to just move ahead, and then when he's able to rejoin.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. Just a friendly reminder that the computer is on the other side of the room. So if you ever need to if you could unmute us, that would be really helpful. Thank you. We hope to have the special representative return back to us. But very much appreciate what he had shared from on the ground. At this point in the program, we'd like to turn to Michael Rubin, who's a resident scholar at the American Enterprise Institute. And Michael, we very much appreciate hearing from you what Turkey's geopolitical objectives are. And if you could even just outline, we're talking a lot about support for extremism here. Can you answer the question, does Turkey really support extremism, and how?
Okay, well, first of all, let me begin by thanking you for organizing this important call. I speak here today basically as a defense analyst. I'm not Armenian, I'm not Turkish, I'm not even Christian. And so I'm speaking purely from an outside perspective, analyzing the situation as I see it. Now, in Washington, if one was going to be a Turkish apologist, there's always been an excuse until this point for Turkey's behavior. We could say when it came to Greece or Cyprus, that it was an economic dispute or a border dispute of some sort. One could say when it came to Iraq, where I'm now speaking to you from, or Syria, that Turkey was trying to counter terrorism. Many people on the ground didn't believe it, and there was a great deal of ethnic cleansing. But if you wanted to see things Turkey's way, there was always that excuse, which diplomats in the State Department and Turkey's friends in the think tank world and elsewhere would always draw upon. When we look at what's going on in Artsakh now, there absolutely is no excuse. All pretense has been stripped away from Turkey here because Turkey has no historical claim to Artsakh. They have no history with Artsakh. If you want to look at pre-modern history, you can go back to the Iranians and Persians and so forth, but Turkey has had no claim. It seems clearly now that Turkey's sole motivation in helping Azerbaijan create these war plans and in encouraging these war plans and in shipping militiamen into this area has been purely animus, not just to Armenians as a people, but to Christianity as a religion. And if we look at this upon the broader context of what Turkey's doing, then it becomes clear that perhaps we shouldn't accept Turkey's excuses anywhere with regard to Greece, with regard to Cyprus, with regard to the Yazidi areas in Iraq and Syria, because it appears very clear that what Turkey's motivations are as malign as can be. There should be no excuse given. Now, in my brief time allotted, let me just address the second part of this question, which is with regard to whether Turkey is using militias. Last year, I had the opportunity to go to Kobane in northern Syria, which was where the Syrian Kurds broke the resistance against the Islamic State. And if you talk to anyone in Kobane, the stories you hear is that Turkey allowed its border to be opened to allow Islamic State fighters to try to outflank the Kurds at the height of the siege of Kobane, which ended up being the turning point for the defeat of the Islamic State when that siege was broken. What we now see is increasing numbers of not just accusations that the militiamen from Syria, which Turkey is using, we're not just seeing that there is the accusation that many of these are drawn from the Islamic State, but we can now name at least 80 of these militiamen that are deployed in Libya, that are deployed in Syria, and perhaps that we will soon see with regard to Artsakh. And we know exactly who they were and what they were doing during their time in the Islamic State. On top of which, let's be clear, we know from interviews with detainees that Turkey has been actively supporting the Islamic State in every shape and form. Myself, when I still was able to go to Turkey, I could go through the Istanbul airport and see people and hear people coming back from fighting with the Islamic State, basically considering Istanbul their R&R. So when we look at the broad picture, it's important that we not allow, and I'm concluding now, it's important that we not allow people to compartmentalize and say that this is just a problem with regard to Armenia and Azerbaijan or Artsakh. What we really do see is that Turkey is on the warpath, and it's going to get worse as Erdogan tries to deflect attention from his own failing economy, and as he nears the 100th anniversary of the Turkish Republic and wants in many ways to replace Ataturk's legacy with his own. With that, let me return to the panel. Thank you for allowing me my opening comments.
Thank you very much, Michael, for your remarks. I'm sure that will encourage a lot of important questions during the Q&A period. Next, I want to turn over to Endy Zemenides with the Hellenic American Leadership Council. And the question I have for Endy is, how has Turkey persecuted Christian communities and nations in the Eastern Mediterranean? And how has Turkey undermined NATO and US interests in the region?
Well, yeah, I'm going to pick up on a theme that Michael introduced. But first of all, it's always a pleasure to fight side by side with my allies and friends at the Armenian National Committee and in Defense of Christians. But as Michael just noted, Turkey's behavior has been consistent, but there was always an apologist for it. And as the saying goes, when someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time, and we didn't. I'll refer everybody, and I hope they can read Benny Morris's excellent book about the 30-year genocide, Turkey's destruction of its Christian minorities. And this is a process as we approach the centennial of the Republic of Turkey, a republic that was built on the bones and blood of Christian minorities, that it seems that they believe, and Erdogan believes, that his job is not done. Today, we couldn't have predicted this was going to happen today when IDC called this press conference. But imagine this: the Greek foreign minister is in Armenia today and got lambasted by Erdogan's spokespeople for daring to lay a wreath at the Armenian genocide memorial. They're trying to erase history. They're trying to erase Christianity. We've seen what they did a century ago to the Christian minorities, and it wasn't one time. The Armenian genocide, the Christian genocide, did not happen just 100 years ago. It continued in the 1950s, ethnic cleansing. And when you sit there and think about the percentage of Christians, what they were at the turn of the previous century and what they are today, less than 2,000 Greek Orthodox Christians left in Turkey, just thousands of Jews, just thousands of Armenian Christians and Assyrian Christians, when they used to be a significant part of Turkey's population. We saw this summer, and unfortunately, Turkey is doing so much that they have, every time there's a crisis that we think the world will finally pay attention, they create another crisis. Just a couple months ago, the three groups hosting today we're launching a Save Hagia Sophia initiative. And it seems that the world has forgotten about that. Hagia Sophia, which is part of World Heritage, the Hora Church, which is part of World Heritage, were forcibly converted without consultations with UNESCO. And these were UNESCO protected sites, despite calls by world leaders, including Ambassador Brown back here, Secretary Pompeo, and it was just forcibly reconverted into a mosque. If there's any other more clear indication of what Turkey's intentions are vis-a-vis Christianity, its Christian minorities, you got to show it to me. But now, what's going on in Artsakh, the attacks on the Armenians, the existence of Artsakh, as Michael said, Turkey doesn't have a stake in it, or the Armenians. It's unfinished business. It's an inconvenience for Turkey. It's an inconvenience for their pan-Turkish ideal of dominance in the region. It's a reminder that they can't just get their way. And it's also a stain for everyone in the West who is not speaking up. More people are speaking up than ever. But when you look at everything that's going on, if we cannot take a stand at this point, when churches are being bombed, when civilians are being bombed, where there is no end in sight, it's going to be a stain on our collective conscience. Today also, again, talk about timing, because there is something we can do. Turkey tested Russian S-400s. Now, everyone involved here believes that CATSA was long violated by Turkey as soon as they bought the S-400s, but this is the last red line that the Trump administration had set. It's time for Turkey to be held accountable. CATSA sanctions should be imposed immediately, because if that is not done, then Turkey believes that it can get away with everything, including what they're doing in Artsakh right now.
Thank you very much, Endy. We very much appreciate your remarks as well as your partnership. At this time, I'd like to turn it over to Richard Ghazal, who's a senior advisor in Defense of Christians. And the question I have for Rich is, really, we know that Turkey has persecuted Christians, from the Aramaean, Assyrian, Chaldean, and Syriac communities and traditions. We know they persecuted these communities, not only within Turkey historically, but elsewhere in the Middle East. Can you outline this persecution and go over issues that these Christians face today?
Well, certainly, Stephen, and thank you. It's great to be with you today to share this virtual stage with our Armenian and Greek friends. As a Syriac, we share a common history, common experiences with our Armenian and Greek brothers and sisters. It's also my honor to join you in holding Turkey and Azerbaijan accountable. Turkey's genocide of Syriac Christians began in 1895, and its bloodiest period lasted from 1915 to 1923, but it didn't end there. Even today, Erdogan's Turkish activity is pointed and aimed at exterminating the region's last remaining Christians, both within Turkish borders and most recently over the border into Syria. Syriac Christians face an immediate and existential threat, and Erdogan aims to finish the genocide that his Ottoman predecessors began a century ago. In southeast Turkey, in a region called Tor Abdin, which in the Aramaic language means the mountain of the servants of God, Syriac Christians continue to be harassed, expelled, and even killed by the Turkish state. In recent years, a number of Syriac Christian mayors and other civic leaders have been removed from office without any cause or due process. A number of Syriac clergy have also been falsely imprisoned by trumped-up terror charges, and this represents a growing pattern, a growing trend for Turkey's targeting of Christian leaders. The Turkish government has also granted impunity to local violent anti-Christian groups who carry out the state's dirty work in the form of proxy crimes against Christians, including murder, rape, kidnapping, and the illegal adverse possession of real property. At the beginning of the 20th century, Christians constituted over 20% of the population of Turkey. Today, they're not even 1% of the population. In fact, they're a fraction of a percent. Now, my question is, how do demographics shift this drastically in just a few short decades? This cannot be, and I assure you it's certainly not, the result of natural human migration patterns. This was a methodical, systematic effort to erase Christianity from the face of Turkey. However, Turkish aggression is not limited to the borders of Turkey. It now extends into Syria as well. Following the fall of ISIS, Syriac Christians have been an important part of the joint Kurdish, Arab, and Syriac democratic project in the autonomous administration of Northeast Syria, also known as AANES. This experiment in democracy has been an exceptional and unprecedented success in securing religious freedom, ethno-linguistic pluralism, and even gender equality, which has resulted in peace, security, and stability in this war-torn region. Unfortunately, Turkey seeks to destroy this hard-earned peace and security through kinetic military strikes, and also by flooding the area with radical jihadists, many of whom are former and current ISIS fighters. Most recently, in October of 2019, Turkey made its bellicose push into the AANES, driving out, displacing, and killing thousands of Syriac Christians and other minorities. They've uprooted a democratic and pluralistic system that respected religious freedom and replaced it with Sharia law. Turkey and its jihadist clients have engaged in countless war crimes and human rights violations, including the arrest and execution of Christians for apostasy and blasphemy, the destruction of Christian churches, the rape and sex trafficking of young Christian girls. Turkey has even weaponized water by cutting off the critical Euphrates water sources during record-breaking heat waves, which has caused untold human suffering. Turkey's current campaign meets the internationally adopted definition of genocide as an attempt to destroy a national, ethnic, or religious group through violent means. This Turkish genocide campaign has caused the region's indigenous Christian population to plummet at an alarming rate. Following President Trump's announcement of sanctions against Turkey in October of 2019, Turkey agreed to a ceasefire. As a result of this agreement, President Trump lifted sanctions and Turkey got its way. However, since October 2019, Turkey has violated this US brokered ceasefire over 800 times. That's less than 1 year in 1 year's time. Turkey remains a rogue and belligerent state. They continue to bombard the last remaining Christian towns in the region. Turkey continues to send jihadists by the thousands into areas where NATO and US coalition troops currently are stationed. Currently, about 500 American ground troops are in northeast Syria, within reach of hostile jihadists at Turkey's behest. Turkey perceives the United States and NATO's silence as weakness, but Turkey is playing a very dangerous game. Erdogan understands only one language, and that's strength. He perceives the inaction as weakness. The United States and NATO allies must take action in the form of tough, biting sanctions and a discontinuation of military aid. So that's what we're dealing with among the Syriacs and Christians of Syria. So we share a lot with Armenian brothers native to Artsakh and Christians throughout the region. So this is a big concern for us, Stephen.
Thank you very much for that information, Rich. It's extremely helpful for our conversation today. And I'd like to pivot over to Aram next. And Aram Hamparian is like a brother to Toufic and like a father or an uncle to me. And his organization, the Armenian National Committee of America, does great work, not only for Armenians, but for many Christians in that part of the world. And so, Aram, I'd just like to ask you about the history of Christianity in Artsakh, how Azerbaijan and Turkey's actions there remind you of the Armenian genocide, and why the international community should respond to the situation with urgency.
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, Toufic. The last overseas trip I was able to take prior to the pandemic was actually to Artsakh. And the most important part, the most meaningful part of my visit there was the time I spent at Dadimak, which is a monastery more than 1,000 years old. The site, though, the holy site, was established by Saint Dadi, who was himself a student of the Apostle Thaddeus, who preached along with Bartholomew in Armenia. The roots of Christianity in Artsakh go back to the 1st century. Archbishop Moderator, who spoke at the IBC summit, spoke about that, how Artsakh was the only part of the Soviet Union that was not allowed to operate a single church. But today they have restored hundreds of churches, only to see them being bombed, including our cathedral in the city of Toufic. So the Christian roots in Artsakh run very deep, and the people there are profoundly devout and have faith in themselves, faith in the world, and faith in God. Stepping back, to think about Artsakh, I think about Artsakh as a very American story. It's the victory of a free people over foreign rule. It's the civics I learned about 1776 when I was in grade school. It's about people having the right to choose their leadership. The words of our own Declaration of Independence, that the just powers of government are derived from the consent of the governed. That's all they ask, nothing more or less than what we would expect for ourselves as Americans. What's at stake here is Turkey and Azerbaijan, Erdogan and Aliyev, trying to finish the work of 1915. Two nations of about 100 million people, large armies, massive economies, bullying, destroying, pummeling a small nation of about 3 million people, a landlocked, blockaded, partitioned genocide survivor state, being nailed to a cross, being nailed to a Caspian oil rig while the world watches. We saw the Congress last year pass resolutions on the Armenian genocide. We're seeing a continuation of that genocide today. It's being fought by Turkey, Azerbaijan, and their ISIS allies. I just heard news just yesterday about how even our humanitarian funds, Armenians around the world and our friends, are collecting, medicine and sleeping bags for families who are living, without homes. And those humanitarian flights now have been blocked by Turkey. So on the one hand, they're killing people, bombing families, and then they're making sure that they don't get even the most basic relief that they might need. So this is an effort by Turkey, I guess I would say, to create a Turkey for the Turks. And it's been a long-term name, Sultan Abdulhamid, Mustafa Kemal Ataturk, Recep Tayyip Erdogan. But to have that Turkey for the Turks, they need an Armenia without Armenians, Kurdistan without Kurds, and an early cradle of Christianity without Christians, without Syrians, Maronites, Arameans, Syriacs, Armenians, Greeks, or any other Christians. Azerbaijan's claim to this territory is remarkably weak. The best they can do is say that Joseph Stalin stole it for them. And it's true, Joseph Stalin did artificially, arbitrarily carve out Artsakh and give it to Azerbaijan for the Soviet era. Artsakh has never been part of an independent Azerbaijan, and it's always been part of the Armenian homeland. The Aliyev government, just a sidebar, is the guy who runs it was given the job by his dad. As soon as he got that job, he put his own family in place. His vice president is his wife. They have no democratic claim, certainly no national, no historical memorial claim to Artsakh. We have been gratified by the congressional response. More than 100 members have already spoken out very forcefully on the subject. Of legislation has been introduced. HRES 1165 is, we hope, moving toward a fast track suspension vote in the U.S. House. Many U.S. states have already recognized Artsakh. We're working on adding to that list. Our asks are pretty simple. Number one, America should condemn outright Azerbaijan's aggression. America should restrain Turkey from adding fuel to this fire. We need to enforce sanctions for all the reasons that Endy discussed, but also over these atrocities. And finally, there's a U.S. military program that even as we speak, even as bombs are falling, there's a USA program that's giving military aid to Azerbaijan. Every last dollar of military aid needs to be stopped immediately.
Thank you very much, Aram. You've perfectly transitioned us to the next question I have for our panelists, and that is recommendations that each of you have for the Trump administration for how it can hold Erdogan accountable for his actions. And to start things off, I believe that Special Representative Avetisyan is back with us. And so, Special Representative, if you'd like to continue, if there were any thoughts that were cut off with the Wi-Fi issue earlier, but if you could focus as well on any recommendations you have for the U.S. government.
Thank you. That kind of complies with the last portion of my presentation, and apologies for the interruption. The war is on all the fronts, and they work hard to cut us from everything we have, which resembles normal life, including the internet and electricity, but we're luckily back online. We think that the Trump administration, any U.S. administration under any president should be more proactive and more involved in this question, in this issue, just because of the problems that I began to cover in my introductory speech. Because it is a member of the OSCE Minsk group, it assumes certain responsibility for the situation on the ground, because we have delegated, including the United States, along with Russia and France, to talk about this, to try to bring the parties together, to enforce the vision of a peaceful solution of the conflict, because this is the prerequisite of everything. One of the main ideas of the settlement process is that it should not be used with use or threat of use of force. With force or threat of use of force. Also, international terrorism is looming here. I mean, if we see the increased presence of terrorists every day. We find more and more footages and visuals, and our intelligence guys intercept communication between them speaking Arabic on a daily basis. This is not a joke anymore, and this is not something hypothetical. And I think that U.S. As the country which is against any terrorism should be considering what they can do. They should be absolutely. I concur with everyone, with all the panelists, and you, the organizers, who said that it's not enough. We cannot. Turkey cannot be restrained, and Azerbaijan cannot be restrained by expressing concerns, by sending the signals. But diplomats know that that is the tip of the iceberg. So we really hope that under those statements there is a whole pyramid of actions. There is soft power. There is hard power is too early, but the soft power is there. And I think that no matter how rich you are in resources, if you cannot sell them, those resources become absolutely nothing. So the U.S. has leverage on Turkey. It has leverage on Azerbaijan. It has leverage through the NATO channels, of course, to make sure that NATO F-16s don't bomb peaceful settlements across Artsakh, or any other armament is not used to kill civilians in violation of the NATO charter or obligations of Turkey. And to enforce all the agreements which have been agreed upon so far, like to cease the fire, to resume the negotiations, and make sure that we exclude the resumption of hostilities as an option. And Azerbaijan should be getting the proper signal that it cannot have Artsakh, it cannot occupy Artsakh. The most effective way of doing it, that's my last, and probably it should be the first and the only and the most important recommendation, is to recognize Artsakh, because this is not an effort to derail the negotiation process. No, This is an effort to promote the negotiation process because the negotiations are towards the peaceful settlement of the problem between Artsakh and Azerbaijan. We are absolutely sure that the recognition of Artsakh by the United States and by the rest of the world will help us exclude the military solution as an option. Will delegate Artsakh with various political and diplomatic means and toolset to protect our interests and to protect our freedom and security before it goes into the battlefield. And it will give Azerbaijan the proper signal that no matter what you see as the solution, or no matter how many missiles you have, it should imply recognition of Artsakh. Artsakh is recognized, then let's agree not to fight. Let's to sit down and as civilized people to try to figure out the rest of the problems, to hear each other's concerns, to try to be receptive towards each other's fears and expectations. But the recognition is probably one of the most effective ways, I would say the only effective way so far, after so many aggressions against it and open genocidal threats and ongoing fighting which is happening right now.
Thank you very much, Special Representative. And that's a perfect transition because I wanted to ask Michael, actually, for your recommendations for how the Trump administration can hold Erdogan and Azerbaijan accountable. And I know that you have recently penned an op-ed about the recognition of Artsakh as well, so perhaps you could start there.
Well, certainly, and I would look at Kosovo as a precedent because when approaching Congress, when approaching the State Department, it's always useful to throw the precedents out there to show them that there's a well-worn path. And since many diplomats, especially also some congressmen, are risk averse, this gives an opportunity to show them that they're not taking as much of a risk as possible. I actually do think it's the right direction here. And so I agree with Robert, I agree with the special representative that this could be a very viable way forward. When it comes to the Trump administration, let's face it, one of the biggest problems we have in a number of fronts is that Trump has a relationship with Erdogan. That's bizarre. Frankly, George Bush and Barack Obama also had relationships with Recep Tayyip Erdogan, which became bizarre. But the only way around this, assuming if Trump remains in office, is to be much more assertive in Congress. Congress has to stop allowing the White House to have waivers, and Congress really needs Republicans and Democrats to stand forward. Again, I'm not a lobbyist by any means. Many of you have much more experience, but what is absolutely essential now is that we stop compartmentalizing. This isn't simply an Armenian issue. Given Turkey's behavior, this is an Armenian issue. This is a Greek issue. This is a Zionist issue, or a Jewish issue. This is a Libyan issue. And the fact of the matter is, there is a huge common interest in, first of all, guaranteeing freedom of religion, and second of all, putting the brakes on Erdogan, because Erdogan's coming after all of us.
Thank you very much. Michael, appreciate that sentiment greatly. I wanted to switch over to Endy now, as well for your recommendations for the Trump administration.
So going back to the original, CATSA is a must, right? It's an easy, going to Michael's talk about policymakers being risk averse. CATSA was a piece of legislation that was passed overwhelmingly bipartisan, bicameral. Turkey has violated over and over again. And if we cannot enforce US law that has such consensus, there's no way we're going to enforce other norms. I believe Aram is right that when imposing CATSA, we should make it clear you're getting it not just because of the S-400s, but because you're a destabilizing force that has proven that you share neither American values nor strategic interests. On the religious freedom front, something that we've worked on, and in talking with USERF, Turkey and Azerbaijan, for that matter, should be immediately downgraded in terms of how USERF evaluates them. Turkey should be put into a country of particular concern category. They're warring on the war that they're waging on Christianity it's clear, and in fact, even on their own citizens. I'd be remiss not to mention their insane fraudulent case against Osman Kavala and Henri Barki for supposedly carrying out or planning a coup, when we know that Osman, one of the things they got him in their targets for is for sticking up for Armenians. And then finally recognizing Artsakh.
Thank you very much, Endy, for your recommendations. Very greatly appreciated. Now we're going to switch over to Rich as well for your recommendations for the administration.
Thank you, Stephen. In pursuing sanctions, obviously, the first step in laying the groundwork would be for the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom, of course, to designate Turkey as a country of particular concern. That really, like I said, will lay the groundwork to instituting, imposing tough and biting sanctions. But more importantly, it's important to look at the reality on the ground in Turkey. We know Erdogan is presiding over a failing economy. His popularity in country has been plummeting in recent years, not just in his home district of Istanbul, where he was mayor for a number of years, but also nationwide. So that's an important reality to look at. Tough sanctions will further exacerbate that trend, and that'll get him to move. Like I said before, his language is strength. That's the only language he understands. So we need to speak his language. And I'm glad, I appreciate Endy's mention of the S-400. If I could just add one point to that. Not only has Turkey acquired the S-400, which is a Russian surface-to-air anti-aircraft missile system, but they're also testing it currently. Not only are they testing it, they're testing it against US-made F-16 weapon systems, which allows them to exploit and understand and find the vulnerabilities in US avionics, radar systems, flight patterns. So that's a huge concern, also to add to the mix. So lots of nefarious things going on. We need to play the same game that the AKP, the ruling party that Erdogan leads, we need to play their same game. We need to respond with strength, because that's the language they're speaking, strength.
Absolutely, Rich. I appreciate that greatly. And for just for clarification for journalists on the call, we do need you, sir, to recommend Turkey for country of particular concern status. But ultimately, it is up to the Secretary of State to accept that designation and to impose sanctions. So that is something that we're also advocating for. Aram, recommendations for the administration.
Sure. I touched on a couple, if I remember, so let me just step back and say that what we need to do at a fundamental level is simply stop outsourcing our U.S. policy to Turkey. Our regional policy should not be decided in Ankara, exported to the U.S., and then enforced by American presidents. It needs to be an American policy. The danger is, of course, that when we outsource policy to Turkey, it serves Turkish interests and ultimately undermines our standing and our American morality. We give them our voice, and then they use it for very destructive purposes. That's number one. Number two, it's clear that Erdogan or Aliyev or any of these foreign dictators, they don't get to vote in the U.S., but it does seem they get a veto in the U.S. And whether it's on CATSA or what's happening today in Artsakh, it seems like they get a veto over the U.S. response. So the natural U.S. response might be a small nation of 3 million is being brutalized by Turkey and Azerbaijan. We should stand up to that. That's a natural American response. It's the underdog, it's the Democratic side, it's the Christian side against forces of intolerance, including ISIS. And that natural American instinct to do the right thing is checked by a foreign influence. And that's the Turkish veto. So very broadly speaking, we need to cut that out. And there's one aspect to this, Stephen and Toufic, that we've spoken a lot about, and one with Endy, which is Turkey's got the long view here. We talked about the book, The 30-Year Genocide. It's been, even more. It's been a century-long plus genocide. And just to give you a sense of the nerve, the arrogance of Turkey, in the middle of their aggression against the entire region, they proposed to the U.S. a memorandum of understanding that would give Turkish claim, Turkish rights to the heritage of everybody in the region. So anybody, any Armenian Christian first century relic, any Syriac sacraments, any Greek holy sites, these would all be encompassed and with a US stamp of approval handed over to Turkey so that they can just consolidate their control over this region and finalize what they would like to see, which is just the erasing, the eradication, the elimination of anybody, and this is in pursuit of their sort of pan-Turkish idea of a Turkey just for the Turks. They're serious. They're as serious as a heart attack on this issue, and yet the U.S. administration, this one and previous ones, just gives them a veto, outsources policy on a whole range of issues, and that has to change. It has to change.
Absolutely, Aram, and that MOU would be certainly shameful if signed. So we've been urging the State Department to reject that proposal from Turkey. At this point, we're going to turn it over to a Q&A from our journalists on the call, as well as folks from Facebook. I'm going to invite IDC Communications Manager Sarah Basile to choose questions, and she'll read them out loud, and then I will try and sort of direct them to the most appropriate panelists. So I'll turn it over to Sarah for our first question.
Awesome. Thank you, Stephen. We've had a lot of very cool discussion questions posed, and so we'll start with this one. What is your assessment of the capacity of the Trump administration and State Department under current distracted circumstances to adequately respond to the crisis?
Over to Michael. I know you penned an article recently we appreciated called "The State Department Has a Turkey Problem." Would you care to speak to the capacity of the U.S. government to tackle this issue?
I mean, ultimately, I think this is a problem in the White House. There is a recognition throughout the U.S. bureaucracy about what problem Turkey has become. And when it comes to more junior diplomats running interference for Turkey, if the White House, if the Secretary of State were to overrule them, they very much could. Now, if we want to go back to 2008 and the invasion of Georgia, it didn't create, there wasn't a reticence there. And in fact, it sharpened thinking. Initially, the Obama campaign's reaction was infused with moral equivalence. They were criticized for that, and it made them react much more seriously to that issue going into the future. But ultimately, if Trump is not going to act, that's the problem, especially if Congress isn't going to step forward and assert itself the way that 20 years ago, many in Congress would.
Thank you, Michael. I appreciate that response. Do any of our other panelists want to weigh in on that question, Endy?
Yeah, I think we have to point out, I mean, while Secretary Pompeo's statement was welcome yesterday, we have effectively outsourced, as Aram said, policy in the region. Secretary Pompeo has not gotten on the phone with Cavusoglu, with his Azerbaijani counterpart, with his Armenian counterpart. President Trump has not called anybody. So you've had Putin make calls, you've had Macron make calls, you've had Lavrov almost permanently in there. And the real danger right now, and this is not only, and Michael nailed it, it's not only an Armenian problem. This is a pattern that we're seeing in Syria, we're seeing in Libya. I think only in the Eastern Mediterranean we haven't seen it there, and that's because Greece and Cyprus have been able to escalate it to the European level. And there's an American base in Suda Bay. But in all these other places, the US is allowing Turkey and Russia to decide how all these conflicts are going to shake out. And we cannot, that makes these conflicts worse. These are two countries that definitely don't care about human rights, and it makes America and the West fundamentally weaker to allow that.
Thank you, Endy. Do any of our other panelists want to weigh in on that question? If not, Sarah, please feel free and share the next question with us.
Thank you. So I know Mr. Rubin wanted to take a stab at this question, but the question poses, what validity is there to the reports that Iran is supporting Armenia in this conflict? If valid, to what extent are they supporting morally, militarily?
Okay, if I may begin, by profession and by education, I'm an Iran watcher, and I used to live in the Islamic Republic of Iran For those of you who are Persian speakers, they used to call me Pesari Shaitani Bozorg, son of the great Satan. When I lived in Iran, I lived in Jolfa, which of course is the Armenian quarter of Isfahan, distinct from Jolfa, which is on the border in the Caucasus. Now, because of the Armenian presence in Iran, there's always been a strong cultural affinity within Iran towards Armenia. This is compounded by the fact that Azerbaijan politically and religiously poses a challenge to the Islamic Republic. Azerbaijan, because of its is a dictatorship, of course, but it's more of a secular dictatorship. And because it had performed better, perhaps because as corrupt as it is, less money was stolen than in the Islamic Republic of Iran, perhaps because it wasn't under the sort of sanctions that the Islamic Republic of Iran was. Many Iranians would look at Azerbaijan and say, how can we in the Islamic Republic say that we have the best system of government, that all is well, when we have another Shiite state, which the standard of living is a little bit superior. That has been eroding recently, but it is clear that the Iranians do have, so as they play around in the region, they would like to keep both sides weak. They, however, do have that cultural affinity. They have been complaining in the last week that there have been several rockets fired by Azerbaijan that have landed inside and over the Iranian border, about 40 kilometers north of Tabriz. And so this could be a warning that the Iranians are saying that should we need to intervene further, that we now have a reason to do so. I think that Azerbaijanis would be well advised to keep track of what Tehran is saying, because while Russia is the prominent influence in the region at present, the Iranians don't want to be left behind. And I think when push comes to shove, the Iranians could give also a much broader diplomatic support to the Armenians, as we have France, Russia, perhaps the United States, Iran. That sort of coalition against Azerbaijan would be remarkable and would show just how anathema the Azeri actions have been, just how despicable they've been. With that, let me pass off to others.
Thank you, Michael. I wanted to invite the special representative to weigh in, because obviously, you're in a bit of a difficult neighborhood. If you would carry special representative just to introduce us to the countries that are bordering, Armenia, Azerbaijan, Artsakh, and kind of detail what your relationship has been with your surrounding states.
Thank you. Indeed, in addition to Mr. Rubin's shared opinion, the opinion he shared with us, yeah, that's true that there is an Armenian community in Iran, and it's been there for centuries, but it's also the very Azerbaijan as an entity has been taken from Iran by the Russian Empire in the 19th century. So there is this very tight connection, and ethnic Azerbaijanis are actually populated in northern Iran with a quantity of, I think, with a number of close to 23 million, as far as I know. So there's a very close bond between northern Iran and Azerbaijan. They actually call each other kind of, they of course know that there is the same ethnicity, and the Turks are trying to play that card and make sure that Azerbaijan is more Turkish than Iranian, but there is a big understanding that Azerbaijan has been part of Iran, and the very name Azerbaijan comes from Atarpetakan, that is a northern province of the Persian Empire at the time, before the Russian Empire took it. And Iran is not interested in strong Turkey, just like the rest of the world who is against the expansionism and aggressive expansionism. And the official position is that Iran is for peace in the region. We can say that Iran supports all the countries which are trying to promote peace. We know that the Iranian government is against the war. We know that they're very, very much concerned with the fact that some of the Azeri missiles shot at the Armenian positions fell on the Iranian territory. But we're glad that they were understanding and don't plan to further destabilize the situation. But it's wrong to say that Iran is supporting Armenia against Azerbaijan. There are so many arguments which show that Iranian position is towards Azerbaijan also in many things. So they try to have that balanced position, and we agree that so far the balance that the Iranian government has found didn't lead to further deterioration of the security situation here. Thank you.
Thank you, Special Representative. And I'd like to just invite Aram to weigh in as well. This is a region of the world that maybe not a lot of Americans are familiar with. You kind of just introduce us to the states that are in the area, the role that these actors play.
Sure, Armenia, as they say, is in a tough neighborhood. The neighbors to the east and west. So traveling west, you obviously get to Turkey, which committed a genocide, denies that genocide, is now pursuing that genocide, and has blockaded that border, for a generation now. That's true. To the east, of course, is Azerbaijan, which is waging a full-scale war against not just Artsakh but Armenia. It also has closed that border. To the north, you have Georgia, and to the north of Georgia, of course, Russia. In the south, you have Iran. So the only two potential paths for the food, the fuel, the basic sustenance that Armenia needs to survive are northern and southern routes. And neither are perfect. Georgia today is, for reasons that are not entirely clear, obstructing, supplies and other materials into Armenia, perhaps in solidarity in some way with Azerbaijan. So it's misguided and definitely not in Georgia's long-term interest. And the southern border, has been a source of trade. Armenia has done its absolute best, in fact, hasn't abided by all the UN sanctions, all the US sanctions, but has still maintained that border simply because to not have a southern border is to be starved to death. So that's Armenia's situation. And from DC's perspective, we sometimes see things through a Russia lens or an Iran lens, and from those kind of, like, I would say, simplistic viewpoints, the ask of Armenia might be, well, why don't you, let's say, limit your relations with your northern and southern neighbors because that would make a lot of folks in DC happy. And the answer pretty, clearly is because that's suicidal. Armenia without trade, Armenia is not a resource-rich country. It requires trade, it requires imports, it requires exports to survive. So Armenia needs to maintain those two relations, the north and south borders, as long as the east and west continue to blockade and even attack this very small republic. Again, I just want to point out the scale and the scope of this. Azerbaijan struggles mightily. They spend a lot of money on lobbyists here in DC to try to create this moral equivalence or political equivalence between the two sides. The fact of the matter is, this is a genocide. It is a crime. It is not a conflict in the least. It is 100 million people. One of the parties, Turkey, a NATO member with the second largest army in NATO, just sending every last weapon, including F-16s, including cluster bombs, to Azerbaijan. Azerbaijan, another large economy because of its oil wealth, 10 million people. So you have 100 million people, huge armies, massive economies, no shortage of weaponry, sending munitions in by the plane load to Azerbaijan, and they're just dumping them on this small republic of free people, 150,000 people. It is a David and Goliath tale. It is a underdog tale. It is, in the most basic terms, the bullying of a genocide survivor state, that a nation that still, after 100 years, is still getting on its feet after the destruction of 2/3 of our population and 9/10 of our territory. A massive part of our economic capacity as a nation was denied to us during the genocide. Our territory, our people, we were dispersed all over the globe. A nation trying to get back on its feet after being pummeled a century ago is now being attacked again in the most, I don't know, it's like, it is a Christian tale of a nation being nailed to a cross, nailed to a Caspian oil rig, and for 30 barrels of Caspian crude, the world's turning away, and that's disgraceful. If that's the price, if that's apparently the price, if Azerbaijan can pump enough oil to enough countries, and if Turkey can bully and bribe their way into influence in the capitals of the world, well, I guess they set the price, and the result is the world, by and large, watches as an innocent Christian nation is nailed to a Caspian oil rig, nailed to a Caspian oil rig.
Thank you, Aram. And I hope everyone out there heard that, because that really outlines the urgency of the situation. I'd like to turn it back over to Sarah for our next question.
Great, thank you for those powerful remarks, Aram. So this will be one of our concluding questions. Erdogan's aspirations to create a pan-Turkish zone from Istanbul to Baku cannot be in the interest of the great powers. Can you talk on the long-term and short-term effects of these aggressions or the further radicalization of the geography? I've kind of shortened it a little bit, but yes.
Sure. Might invite Rich just to come in and comment on just Turkish geopolitical ambitions.
Thank you, Stephen. Yeah, certainly. We've known since 2002 that Recep Erdogan is a neo-Ottoman. His aspirations is to resurrect the final caliphate and for him to be the head of that caliphate. That translates into geopolitics as to create a hegemony, a pan-Turkic hegemony in the Arab world, in the Muslim world, stretching up through the Balkans. This is his vision. And he'll stop at nothing to do it. He'll step on whoever is in his way to do it. We know this. NATO knows this. NATO governments know this. The hesitation is perplexing because the threat is real. We've seen the rise of ISIS in the last, say, 5 years ago. We know that this idea of pan-Islamism, theocracy can easily be proliferated and accrue followers, zealous followers. So yes, this certainly has geopolitical ramifications if we sleep on it. We can't view Turkey as just another Westphalian type nation state. They parade themselves as such with normal national interests and so on, but they're anything but that normal, typical nation state. They have bigger aspirations that are menacing for the Western world, or not just the Western world, but certainly the modern world, just incompatible. So it's a matter of recognizing this and moving forward with that understanding.
Thank you, Rich. And I wanted to invite Endy Zemenides as well. Do you have any thoughts on how Turkey's geopolitical ambitions go against the interests of the U.S.?
Absolutely, and we should be looking at let's say the geopolitical chessboard beyond from Turkey to the Caucasus. Turkey used to be celebrated by all the apologists here as the zero problems with neighbors foreign policy country. They are now a country that has zero neighbors without which they have problems. And as we look at the Eastern Mediterranean all the way, to Libya, you're looking at major flashpoints in the region, and Turkey's involved in all of them, in Syria, in Iraq, in Libya, in the Aegean, in the Eastern Mediterranean, in occupied Cyprus, in Artsakh, in Armenia. So the fact is that Turkey has detected or has interpreted a withdrawal from the United States. And as we say, power abhors a vacuum. They are trying to get in and determine the rules of the game in all these other regions, thinking that they are physically closer than anybody else, or cutting their deals with Russia. And that's why it's extremely important for the US to, at the very least, start implementing CATSA. That's the surest sign that it's not leaving the region. And more importantly, there's one more policy option that has been, and I'd love to hear Michael's thoughts about that, because he's in the region of the world where the Greek foreign minister just met with the Iraqi government in Baghdad. Turkey's actions have been so wild that it has created a bandwagon effect. When you're looking at who would have a decade ago told you that Greece and Cyprus and Israel and Egypt and Jordan and Iraq and France would all be working together? And now the Greek foreign minister in Greece and Armenia and Cyprus are working together. And the U.S. and Secretary Pompeo is up a couple weeks ago in Thessaloniki in northern Greece, saying that, basically giving the signal that Greece is the key U.S. ally for Western Balkan strategy. So all of this has come because of Turkey's bad behavior, and U.S. policymakers would be wise to support this growing alliance, because it gives you more options. And as Michael has written before about, it allows you to resist Turkish blackmail over items like Incirlik.
Thank you, Endy. And Michael, would you care to weigh in?
If I can weigh in with a couple of words, I'm sorry.
No, please go ahead.
Not my turn. I'm sorry, Mike.
Robert,
I
please
didn't
go
mean
ahead.
to interrupt you. Yes, I didn't hear that part. I just wanted to say that geographically, it's not just the South Caucasus. This is much more than that. So you can multiply the geopolitical negative expectations times 15, because the idea of Grand Turan, it will extend all the way from Balkans all the way to the Far East. And the Armenians are the only Christian nation which is kind of a bone in the neck of that idea from implementing. So they already swallowed Azerbaijan imperatives. They plan to go Trans-Caspian into the Central Asia. And if the US or any other country is kind of calculating what this can lead to, please consider that too. South Caucasus is not the ultimate goal of pan-Turkic expansionism by Erdogan. It will extend all the way to all those Turkic nations, all the way to the northern Chinese regions where they came from in the 11th century. I'm sorry, Rubin, Mike, to interrupt you. Please go ahead.
It's no problem. And just in support of what Robert has said, anyone who's ever driven from the Ankara airport down into the city will pass multiple murals showing all the Turkic nation flags, explaining this pan-Turanic idea, which any visitor to Ankara can't help but to see. Just in addition to what Endy said, one thing I just want to make clear from an American perspective is this isn't just about the instability which Turkey is causing in the region. The challenge which Turkey is posing to the United States is its fundamental desire to rewrite the post-World War II liberal order. When we see that the tactics which Turkey is now employing are the same tactics which it used in 1915, and the ethnic cleansing which it has taken part in over the years, it is clear that we are seeing not just a desire to kill Armenians, but which is real, but we're seeing a real challenge to every international institution and every institution to which Turkey is a member. That's what we're facing, and that's why it's an American interest beyond simply our concerns about what goes on in the region. And with that, I'll turn the floor back over.
Thank you, Michael. Sarah, any other press questions?
No, thank you, Stephen. So this will be recorded, or this has been recorded, and we'll be posting this online. I know a couple of people were asking that question. As of now, we don't have any more questions being posed, but I want to thank all the panelists for their great answers.
Okay, absolutely. And since we do have a few extra minutes here, I'll just turn it back to each panelist. If there's like any closing thoughts, just 60 seconds, if there's anything that you all want to cover that wasn't mentioned before. So I think I'll look at, I think we'll go to Rich real quick. Rich, any final concluding thoughts?
Certainly, Stephen, thank you. Well, there's really nothing more that can be added to what was said today. A lot of great thoughts were exchanged, but one thing I will close with is we need to understand Turkey's aspirations, as we mentioned earlier, but the U.S. needs to respond with a clear-throated, sober position. Politics are always going to be politics, but this is bigger than politics. This has civilizational implications. Aram mentioned earlier, what Michael and Robert, everyone in attendance mentioned earlier. This is existential. This is an existential question for Armenia, the sole Christian island in the South Caucasus, bridging its way into the Middle East, up through the Balkans, the Christians of Syria and Iraq, Lebanon. the ramifications go on, and they're grim. So again, proceeding with a clear voice, strong voice, and sober position.
Thank you, Rich. Endy, any concluding thoughts real quick before we close out?
Sure. On top of all the geopolitical policy recommendations you've heard, there was another announcement this week by Secretary Pompeo that think tanks taking foreign money are going to have to disclose it. And one of the reasons we've gotten to such a bad place is these apologists have been bought and paid for by Azerbaijan and Turkey. Azerbaijan and Turkey have been operating in Washington according to the maxim of whatever money can't buy, more money can. And they're using that wealth and influence to act contrary both to U.S. interests and values. That spotlight, even before State Department starts receiving those registrations, we know who a lot of them are. That spotlight should be shown on them. People who are bought and paid for by Azerbaijan and are writing in newspapers should be identified as such, because they're negatively affecting a good policy debate.
Thank you, Endy. Michael, any concluding thoughts?
Yes, first of all, there's not much I can add. I mean, Endy, Aram, Robert have basically said it all. All I would say is, my opinion hasn't always been consistent with what it is today, but several people took the time to reach out to me to try to convince me I was wrong, and they managed to convince me. The reason I say this is not everyone's bought and paid for. Sometimes people are just wrong. And it's important to be able to not just celebrate among one's friends, but actually target those who are on the other side of the policy argument, not as enemies and not as adversaries, but people that need to be convinced. And I do want to thank people who have worked so hard to convince me. Ultimately, look, many people want to do the right thing. And frankly, the good thing about Recep Tayyip Erdogan is he's convincing everyone what the right thing is frankly, it's the opposite of whatever he's doing. And so with that, I'll sign off and just second what Aram, Endy, and Robert have said.
Thank you, Michael. Special Representative Avetisyan, concluding thoughts.
Thank you very much. I wanted to thank everyone, the IDC, the ANCA, all the listeners, the panelists, of course, for your expertise and sharing your personal stories too. For everyone who showed the interest, we thank you from here, from Stepanakert. We appreciate your being part of the fight, and I think that all of us should join our hands and our efforts to prevent the crimes against humanity, which are happening every minute, not only in Artsakh, elsewhere around the world, but particularly for me, which is very painful, which is that is happening in Artsakh, the crimes against our civilization, because this is absolutely not the world we would expect to see in the 21st century. And of course, everyone, every nation, every organization, every person who is against the evil of the genocide as a toolset for solving the political issues, they should be on board with us, despite of their religion, despite of their political view, despite of their nationality. And just as to second the words Aram, when he mentioned that there are voters there and there are no voters in the United States. Absolutely, yes, there is a lobby. And we always say that Azerbaijan is perfect at exporting two things, oil and corruption. But it shouldn't discourage the Americans who have a stronger say with your elected representatives and in all the state administration, in all the state bureaucracy, to raise your voice. I'm sure that the United States will listen to you rather than pro-paid, short-term lobbied efforts. The lobbied efforts have short-term effect and mostly negative. I'm sure that you as Americans will push your country that will make you, again, one more time proud to be Americans. Thank you very much, and I hope that together we'll prevail of all the challenges.
That special representative, and I'll invite Aram to actually close us out, provide any concluding thoughts for us.
Yes.
I just want to start off I thank him, each of you. Michael, your words hold special meaning for us, and we deeply appreciate it. Endy, a dear brother, many struggles together, and you know the respect that we have for you. Rich, thank you. Your part and your role in IDC has been remarkable and enriched an already powerful organization. Robert, I can't say enough about. Robert won't mention this, but he is today in a city that's being shelled mercilessly by the Azerbaijani government. He and his colleagues are conducting the work of diplomacy around the world. They don't sleep, barely stop to eat, but he and the foreign minister and the remarkable team they have, they're doing the Lord's work, trying to save this ancient nation. And I have just the utmost respect for Robert and his team. For Toufic, he stood shoulder to shoulder with us through dark times, and that's, I think, we're the most powerful bonds reformed is when we face the dark and difficult times of our lives. And that's ultimately, I guess I'll wrap up with this thought, which is, let's shine as much light as we can on the situation. Let's draw as much public attention to this issue as possible. Azerbaijan and Turkey chose a pandemic. They attacked Armenia during a global health crisis. They want this done in the shadows. They want to be able to finish their evil agenda, their pan-Turkish agenda of eradicating the Armenians in the region. They want to do it without the world noticing. It's what they did in the First World War, right? Under cover of war, they committed a genocide. In very much the same spirit, they're doing that once again. So in that way, light is our ally. Sunshine is what we need. So please, I appeal to each of you on this call to spread the word, to speak about recognizing ourselves, to just draw attention to the crisis facing this nation, and ultimately the implications of that crisis for the region and the world.
And thank you very much, Aram. And before we close things off officially, Toufic, would you care to share any concluding thoughts on that?
Yes, I want to thank each and every one of you, Michael, Robert, Endy, and Aram. Thank you for all of your help and support on this. The American people, they know better, and they know it's the right thing to do. And it's also in the U.S. national interest to work on this. And we will continue to work through this. The American national interest is at stake here. It's also the use of S-400 and many other things. So it's a nonpartisan issue, and we thank you for all of your support. And we need to advocate more and work a lot more with our members of Congress and the administration. And Michael, as you said, we don't always have to agree, but when we find the truth, we will support. So thank you for doing this, and hopefully many others will do the same. Thank you.
Have a wonderful day, everyone.
Thank you.